Hello everyone, I'm Andy Andrea. Thanks for joining us again for the 7th Open Dialogue. As you can see in the chat, we've got a few people saying where they're from, and it's people from all over the world. So say hello, tell us where you're from. Hello everyone, I'm Andy Andrea. Thanks for joining us again for the 7th Open Dialogue. This open dialogue has been the most popular of the lot. It seems that bringing people like you together to explore challenges and look for action is what you want. And from what you tell us, you want more. Keep letting us know what issues you want to hear about, and always something to do with partnering for a better world, and also who you want to hear from. Today, we've another amazing group of people to speak with you again. This time, the question is, what partnerships do we need to prepare for the next emergencies? What we've seen is the cascading effect of the COVID-19 crisis, the complexity, the controversy, and the interconnectedness of issues. We've also seen the coming together of some unlikely partners to deal with the effects. Our speakers today will tell us what we can learn from their experience of the past and from research, so we can prepare for the future. The whole point of these open dialogues is to be output oriented. It's not just thought leadership. So our speakers are here to make their own call to action that leads to a better world. First, we have some short messages for you. Impact 17 sits on the WHO Private Sector Task Force, and here is what they've asked us to convey to you today. First, we can only confront pandemic challenges by working together with a One Health approach. We need partnerships that address the links between human, animal, and planetary health. The need for national and global solidarity has never been more apparent. Second, we must all continue to make the most of the simple tools we have to hand, such as hand hygiene, physical distancing, respiratory etiquette, masks, ventilation, surveillance, isolation, compassionate care, contact tracing, and quarantine. Third, we need to fill a big financing gap, which currently stands at $34 billion, with $14 billion needed immediately. And WHO have launched an ACT accelerator, which you can find out more about on the WHO website. And that was launched to accelerate development and the availability of COVID-19 tools, equitable global access to safe, quality, effective, and affordable COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, and to ensure no one is left behind. You've sent us a lot of excellent questions that will push the speakers for practical answers. We'll do our best to get through as many as we can. Some of the questions are representative of others, so we'll be starting with some of those. But while the speakers are talking, you can also use the chat function to ask them questions. And they've promised to do the multitasking, answering verbally and on the chat during the discussion. But please be patient until they get to yours. If you've been contacted about your question via email, then just click the raise the hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get round to you. Please make the most of this opportunity. Let's try to get as much out of our speakers as we can while we have them. So who are they? Well, with us today, we have Leah Stadler, who's an Associate Professor of Strategic Management at the Grenoble École de Management. She's a world-renowned expert in partnering and has published award-winning papers on cross-sector partnerships, partnerships for environmental change, sustainable development, and disasters, and so on. And her papers have been published in journals such as the Journal of Business Ethics and Business and Society. Luc Chauvin is the Chief of Interagency and Humanitarian Partnerships at UNICEF. Luc has worked for the UN for around 30 years, 25 of which have been in postings to places like Namibia, Gaza, Rwanda, Iran, Nepal, Pakistan, Thailand, for both country and regional responsibilities. Luc is now leading a team that develops UNICEF's humanitarian partnerships with other UN agencies, with NGOs, with international organizations like the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, but also with the private sector and what they call standby partners as well. Frank Clary is the Vice President of Agility's Global Sustainability Programme. He also represents Agility on the Steering Committee Chair of the Logistics Emergency Team. And that's a multilateral public-private humanitarian partnership between 4 of the world's leading global logistics companies, including Agility, UPS, Maersk, and DP World, and the UN and the World Economic Forum. And this is currently one of the most successful multi-sector emergency response partnerships. David Nash is the Senior Flood Resilience Alliance Manager at the Zurich Foundation. The Alliance is a multi-sector partnership led by the Foundation, finding practical ways to help communities strengthen their resilience to floods all over the world. And David has been involved in partnership building and facilitating since the beginning of his career. And now he's especially concerned, he tells us, with how corporates engage with local communities. So let's get straight to the big question for all our speakers. And we'll start with David. David, based on your experience, what kind of partnerships do you think we need so we can prepare, respond, and cope with the emergencies of the future?
Well, I think thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this panel today, Andy. And I think that the learning that I've got from particularly working with the Flood Resilience Alliance is that there are a couple of aspects to partnership for the future. One is that we need to be thinking before the disaster rather than thinking about what we do when a disaster strikes. Disasters come quick and fast on the tails of each other at the moment, and with the way in which climate change is kind of influencing that, we'll continue to move even faster. So unless we get ahead of that curve and unless we start to think about what we can do before those disasters to try to reduce or limit their impacts, we're going to be playing catch up, and the opportunity for genuine long-term engagement of different sectors together in a partnership kind of way will be almost impossible to do. So in order to do that, we need to kind of think about getting ahead of the curve. We also need to think about the way in which multiple sectors play together. The way in which disasters strike and impact in communities in particular are dependent upon the way in which the community system works. It's a very multi-dimensional, complex kind of relationship, and is often not solved by simply having a partner or one partner on the ground who can do one kind of thing. I think it's about kind of getting to the point where we really bring together multiple sectors and try and harness the skills and expertise from different perspectives to look at the partnership as a whole. Certainly that's what we found with the Flood Resilience Alliance.
Luke, what about you? You've had a very wide range of experience, and what kind of partnerships do you think that we need for the future?
Thanks, Andy. No, very much agree with what was just said by David. I mean, on the preparedness side of things, clearly, with the way things go, when you look at a bit the history, the last 15 years, the humanitarian needs have more than increased 7 times. You know, I just look back at the OCHA appeals back in 2005. The entire international committee was asking for about $5 billion a year in terms of humanitarian financing. This year we have reached, and this is not the end of 2020, we have reached $35 billion. So clearly preparedness, there is going to be a much bigger effort needed in terms of investing in preparedness, in resilient systems, because every dollar or every euro or every pound that is invested into preparedness will save 4 times that amount in response. So very much agree with what David was saying. And then second thing that I will say is really partnerships that also build national systems, national capacity, so that an organization like UNICEF or other international humanitarian agencies, basically, ideally, we should be out of the job in 15 years down the line. Maybe it will not be so, but unless we invest in national capacity, we'll build the capacity of governments, we'll help them doing their job because they are primarily responsible for humanitarian preparedness and response, build capacities of local communities, we will not solve the problem. So this will be my 2 pictures. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Luc. I think I agree with some of the things that you and David just said. One is, David referring to planning and being able to actually have a, fit into the systems and be focused also, or have a capability for local resilience. I see the same thing. I see partners for the futures need to be relevant. They need to actually respond to actual risks, needs, and they need to be established with a purpose, not just for the sake of having a partnership, but making sure that the partnership you have is capable. So relevant and capable. The partnerships needs to function to support humanitarians and beneficiaries, and they need to add value. And they need to be, as Luc pointed out, locally relevant and resilient, because there's a lot of pressure on the international humanitarian system right now. And Luc's right, in 15 years, we shouldn't be talking about this. Other people should be having these conversations. And then the last 2 things I would note is they should be technologically enabled. We should understand that we are in the information age. We're starting to see huge impacts in the private sector on big data and automation and things of that nature. And I'm not saying like we want robots in the field or anything like that, but we need to make sure that partnerships in the humanitarian system that is being served is also tied in with that information and technology. As it should be baked into these partnerships. And then the last thing and most important is people. People are still the most important parts of these partnerships. Relationships matter, and you can't get to a tech-enabled, relevant, functioning partnership unless you're working collaboratively with other people. So you still have to have these relationships in place in order to be successful, I think. Those are some of my observations.
Great, thanks, Frank. And Leah, from an academic perspective, what does your research tell us that about the next generation of partnerships?
Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting shift if we look at the research on partnerships. So before it was more on how does this work, how to manage these partnerships, and now it has moved to how can partnerships achieve greater societal impact. And so that starts with who is on board. And here a shift from bilateral partnership to multi-partner partnerships, and also partnerships that bring several competitors on board. Not just in order, let's say, not only in order to use that greater potential, but also to increase the coordination also across industries, so that we are moving from the atomistic, fragmented partnership landscape to a greater integrated one. And by bringing competitors to the partnership, that adds, of course, additional challenges, but we also have interesting research that shows how we can handle the competition, or let's say the competitive relationships, and how to use them in order to benefit the partnership. So then the second part is, what do the partnerships do? So the question of, do they only focus on specific products or only technology? And the next generation partnerships embed that in a more encompassing theory of change. So it's kind of adding on what Frank said. So it is about technology, but that is not enough. It has to be embedded in the whole concept of change. And the last part, so partnerships that are better anchored into local and global systems. So that's replicating actually what Luke and Frank already said, so that we don't have so the silo approaches, but especially for developing the resilient landscapes that we need more coordination between partnerships. And so next generation partnerships are better anchored and embedded in their local systems so that they enhance the local capacities.
I think interestingly, Andy, if I may, the interesting thing about the idea of competition and bringing competitors into this relationship is really quite challenging. The Flood Alliance has got a series of tools that help measure resilience at a community level, and we've been doing some work in Mexico. And in Mexico, the AXA Foundation has reached out to us because they want to do some work in a similar kind of area, and they like what we're doing, and they like the tools that we've got. And so it's fairly straightforward. We want to share these tools so they can use them. But actually talking to the various kind of head office functions of those two major insurance players and getting them to realize that there doesn't have to be a competitive advantage or a fight about this relationship on every occasion. There can be places where we can actually collaborate and work together, is proving really quite challenging.
And then it's a question also to design the partnership accordingly, that you have these spaces where everyone can work on his or her own, and then where you have the spaces where you work together and not where you do everything together.
That's great. Well, that's a really good start. You really set a good context there. And we're going to take some questions from the floor, so to speak. And we're going to start first with Kanisa, and then Daniel Schwartz, and then Josephine Gambard. So we're going to, first of all, I'm going to hand over the floor to Kanisa for the first question. Over to you, Kanisa. It looks like Kanisa has suddenly dropped off. So we'll go to Daniel Schwartz next. Okay, Daniel, you can speak now. You just have to.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Schwartz here from MasterCard in New York. Question for the group. Want to drill down a little bit. Where are the bright lights of international cooperation, especially during the past 6-7 months? And how can we scale those best practices to other sectors? Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Before you answer, we're going to take another question, this time from Josephine. Josephine, there you are. Okay, go ahead, Josephine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So my name is Josephine Gambard, over from Paris here at Philanthropy Advisors France, a consulting firm here in Paris in development and humanitarian work. So my question was more regarding how we can collaborate, and specifically to prepare for emergencies ahead of time, and how can we build partnerships ahead of the emergency? Sorry, that's my cat. Ahead of the emergency, to really try and, again, also reduce the impact of the emergency as it happens. Thank you very much.
And we'll just take, thank you, Josephine. We'll just take one more question, and we'll try Kanisa one more time. Where are you, Kanisa? Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Kanisa. What I wanted to find out was, what progress can we see, if any, in the way that partnerships are being managed in this crisis, in this emergency, compared to perhaps emergencies in the past, like 10, maybe 20 years ago? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kanisa. So I think with that, if you don't mind, Luke, we'll come to you first. I know that your sharp mind has already absorbed those questions and that you're ready. And the other speakers will feel free to interject as we go along.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, I'll try to give it a shot. Maybe I will start with the question from Josephine and then Kaisa on partnerships model, what works, etc. And I think it goes back a bit to the introduction. I don't think we really need to reinvent the wheel, but basically to build on existing partnerships model that function. It's within the humanitarian world, humanitarian sphere, there is an architecture that is actually working quite well, that has been practicing for the last at least 15 years. It's a bit of a bizarre name. It's called the clusters, and basically it's about sectoral coordination. And this has been in function since about 2005, back in the Pakistan earthquake. Basically, it gives a lead role to a specific agency to coordinate one sector intervention. So for health, it will be WHO. For education, is going to be Save the Children and UNICEF, etc. When it comes to logistics, it's the World Food Program. When it goes to protection, it's UNHCR. So basically, the key actors have agreed between themselves in terms of allocating certain sectors which they lead and which they have to coordinate. And again, this has been in place for the last 15 years and it's working quite well. So what I'm saying is that what we need to do is actually to bring new partners within an existing system rather than trying to build something completely different that will take a long time just to adjust. So this is what I would pitch. Maybe I'll stop here, but happy to make further comments.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree that it's a system that works particularly well. It may well help to coordinate action on the ground amongst actors who have a role to play, who are funded to be able to play that role, who need to be able to respond and kind of move into that space very quickly. But where I think the challenge comes is in terms of bringing other sectors into that picture, and particularly thinking about the funding sector, whether that be through private foundations, corporate foundations, or other kind of specific funding bodies that are looking to fund particular work. It's very difficult for that to be mobilized through the kind of cluster mechanism, because the cluster mechanism is designed, as you say, to coordinate action when it's immediately needed. I think that there needs to be kind of a stepping back from that and kind of getting ahead of that place to try to build these extra kind of sectors into that. If we think about the private sector, for example, there's a lot of talk around needing to engage the private sector much more, but we seem to be somehow stuck in this strange kind of world where we don't seem to be able to make that connection. And I think that's largely because the way the private sector would work would be on a longer term horizon, would be, instead of looking at a response kind of thing, would be looking to be viewing it strategically and trying to understand where their strategic investment could be played. And so it's over a much longer period of time. So I think whilst there are some positives, and particularly in terms of making sure that action is coordinated and works on the ground, I think that we need to think about how we can then connect others into that ahead of time. And I think that probably also goes back to something I said at the start, is we need to be ahead of the curve rather than relying upon the good work that happens at the response phase.
And I think also, so the question was, what is different now than it has been 10 years ago? I think what is different now, and also what we have found in our research, so that you can build on the existing partnership structures that are there, the relationships that have built over time, to use them to flexibly kind of repurpose your partnerships. So we see that in the global health partnerships that they are bringing on board now, also solutions for COVID. Instead of starting from scratch a new partnership built on what is out there. So I think that is a difference compared to 10 years ago. And also if you look at the landscape of the global partnerships, over time they are able or have been able to move from the global level to more locally adapted solution. And I think that can also be used for the next emergency.
My 2 cents on with regard to Josephine's question, I think that the prior speakers have said some very good things. I don't have comment on the efficacy of the humanitarian systems that's operating right now, but it certainly is the system in which we're operating. And I would suggest that if there are organizations that are looking to say how they can partner with humanitarian organizations or NGOs or anything else, that following the way the system is set up is a good place to start, because the one thing that I do know about it is the lead agencies do a lot of risk mapping to address the issues. So the lead agencies will look at, what's going on with water and sanitation, with food, with medicine, with reconstruction, with all the different aspects of the humanitarian response system, and they identify risks. And I think that research might be decent and good enough for private sector organizations and NGOs to determine what gaps can be filled by partnerships. So I would suggest that for philanthropy advisors, Josephine, that finding out who your partners are, organizations that might be interested in pushing philanthropy resources into specific causes or issues, looking what research is being done out of OCHA and other places might help identify the risks and gaps.
Great, thank you.
That doesn't answer Kanisa's or Daniel's questions. How do we, shall I just keep going there? We'll tackle Daniel because he was first. Daniel, you asked where the bright lights are in international cooperation right now. So from my perspective, I've seen good progress in a few different places. One, the logistics emergency team working with the logs cluster. Of course, I'm partial. I'm a member of that team and a member of that organization. But I've also seen good stuff at the Pandemic Supply Chain Network via the WHO, and the World Economic Forum has been doing good things in both. And I think MasterCard is a member of that. So I'm seeing some good bright sparks there.
It's a good segue to the next question from Kimberly. Kimberly, I'm just going to click the button to allow you to ask your question.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Hi, Leah, Luke, David, and hi, Frank. I'm Kimberly from Berlin, and I have a question about sustainability, actually. Because do you think that the COVID-19 crisis really changed anything about the perception of urgent partnerships and partnership actions in climate change and sustainability matters? Thank you.
That's a really, really interesting question. It's one that I've been thinking about quite a lot over the last few days, actually, and looking at the COVID response from the world. I think one of the things that strikes me most about the COVID response is just how nationalistic it is, and how centered in individual nations' response to what is a global problem. Just take the UK as an example. If we threw a ring fence around the UK, we banned all travel, we quarantined everybody in it for a 2 or 3 week period, we could get under control in the UK, and that would be completely destroyed the moment the first traveller came through the door that was carrying COVID-19. You cannot solve this pandemic problem without a global coordinated mechanism. Each individual nation may well be able to contribute to that solution, but ultimately you need global coordination and global action to be able to make that happen. And that spins out into the climate crisis. You take a look at the climate change. Climate change affecting Britain is all very well, but it's probably not generated or originating in Britain. It's coming from somewhere else. And we can take as much action as we like, screwing renewable energy light bulbs into the sockets and reducing our use of plastics, and all of that's very good, but it isn't going to solve the problem without global coordination. I think that's the one thing that is really coming over strongly from the way in which the world's responding to the COVID-19 situation.
What about you, Luke? How has the COVID-19 situation affected you and your partnership work?
I mean, fully agree with what David was saying in terms of, I think COVID has just refocused the need to have a very strong, cooperation across the world, because it will not be solved by any single nation. Or, I mean, I think it has worked pretty well, actually, despite some of the constraints in terms of not having enough flights, because airlines were canceling flights, etc. So not always easy. And also agree with what Frank was saying in terms of the great work done by the logistics cluster, for example, bringing also private companies into the logistics cluster, making available, free flights, etc., for humanitarian agencies such as ours or WHO or others. Actually, the response from member states and from the private sector when it comes to UNICEF has been quite strong and quite positive. I mean, we had launched an appeal for almost $2 billion, which is almost 70% funded. Of course, there are lots of needs out there, over 100 countries needing medical equipment, ventilators, respirators, etc. So we are in a big operation to provide these equipments. But after initial difficulties in sourcing some of these equipments, it's actually working quite well right now.
Okay, we're going to cluster the next three people again together because they have a similar approach. We'll go to Rebecca, Steve Simmons, and Uwe. And we'll start with Rebecca. Rebecca, you have the floor. But you're on mute. You might want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Andy. So my question is quite broad and you can go wherever you like with it. And the question is, what advice and thoughts do you each have about what makes corporate humanitarian partnerships work well? So, and the question originates from what I did my master's in. I looked at 2 large-scale partnerships founded in the clusters and did a comparison of the 2 of them. And I'm really curious to see if that world has moved on since I did that. Leah, you made some reference to some ships. I'd like to hear more about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Before you answer, Leah, we'll ask Steve and Uwe to pose their questions as well. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, guys. I know lots of organisations talk about partnerships, and it seems like a good idea, but very often they don't seem to get actioned. In your opinion, we talk about the need for change from an academic point of view. Leah says very well. But what are, as far as you're concerned, the obstacles to setting up purposeful partnerships and useful partnerships that aren't just safe?
Thank you, Steve. And now we'll go to Uwe. Uwe, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe briefly, I mean, also coming from UNICEF, different part than Luke in the private sector partnerships team, specifically on the multi-stakeholder partnership side. So it came a bit up from what Leah said. There's a lot of talk about collective action to address these global systemic issues like global health security and other things right now. There's also a lot of talk about public-private partnerships or collaboration. But specifically, my question is about what role can the private sector play here, specifically, including working with the UN? And Luke talked about the role that the UN has engaging with governments. From a UNICEF perspective, we are on the ground before, during, and after a crisis and all of these things. But how does the private sector fit into this? I mean, the point of competitive environments came up. How can we collaborate collectively in a pre-competitive environment? I mean, beyond CSR, beyond philanthropy, beyond fundraising also. So how can we engage the private sector aligned with your business models? We talk a lot about shared value. But from my perspective, this doesn't work bilaterally. That's not scalable. So how can the private sector engage in such collective action with the public sector or with the UN and balance this competitive, pre-competitive challenge, basically?
Thank you. Can we start with Leah, seeing as you were identified at the beginning of these questions, Leah?
So I think the first question was about what makes successful corporate humanitarian partnerships and what have we learned, especially in the last years. I think that was Rebecca's question. So this is a question that fill a 1-hour slot. And but I think so what came out is to distinguish between the partnership at the relational level and at the project level. So that it's really important to develop the mutual understanding at the relational level, and then to see the project level a bit separate. And then when it comes to the project level, so especially for the corporate partners to know exactly what can they contribute, also to communicate that internally, why does this partnership make sense, so that the corporate partners are involved not just with their sustainability department, but really with their core capabilities. And then when it comes to the projects, to have like this milestone and pilot-based approach, so that you can develop a mutual or a continuous improvement approach where you're learning on the way and have this learning process ingrained in the partnership planning and management. But I would also, I think that links very nicely to the second question about what are the biggest obstacles. And I think in terms of research, we have a couple of failed partnership case studies, and I think we can learn the most of them. And I would just like to highlight one. So there's a fantastic case study, Conflicting Cultures by Leader Stott, the partnership. So the partnership initiative, partnering initiative. And so this highlights that most of the obstacles are in setting up the partnership, so knowing why everyone is involved and that there's really mutual interdependence, and the relationship management. So I think these are two big obstacles to setting up the right partnership and developing trusting relationships. And I stop here.
I think those are good comments. I would largely agree with what Leah has said. I think, Rebecca, for like what makes partnerships work well, I would say trust building and relationships are important. I think having shared common interests and values, and when I say that, I mean technical. So for example, in our partnerships at Agility, we focus on logistics and supply chain, and then for development things related to education. These are issues that are important to our company, and the same with the LET. We work with the logs cluster, and we're all supply chain companies, so no surprise, we speak the same language and we understand. And I think Leah also brought up a good point that these partnerships have to be managed. And if you don't have, trust building and relationships and a managed focused partnership, then it creates obstacles, because you don't know where the partnership is intended to go, or how it's supposed to get there, and why it's supposed to get there. And then for Uwe, for your question about what role can the private sector play in these multi-stakeholder partnerships, I think also it's very important that partnerships have scope. They have to be clear and focused, and that has to be understood. What we communicate is that we're one tool in a very big humanitarian toolbox. And like when coronavirus first hit, the LET partners, including the logs cluster, knew that, listen, there's no way that these 4 companies in the logs cluster can meet the supply chain needs of the world. But we can offer resources where they're necessary and required, but keeping it focused, keeping it tight, can help build effective functioning partnerships. So that's my answer on these questions.
Frank, I had an anonymous note from someone asking if you could give a couple of specific examples on what you've been saying.
Is that from my wife?
I'm afraid, well, her surname was Clary.
Okay. So yes, a couple of specific examples. For trust building, we spent about 18 months building the LET partnership back in 2006 and 2007. And it was new, it was different. And humanitarians, we didn't understand humanitarians, and humanitarians didn't understand us. And we spent 18 months in dialogue with the logistics cluster members, and going and working with the WFP and the logs cluster in the field, and getting to know each other. And that resulted in us understanding, okay, we have specific training requirements that we need to fulfill in order, if we want to work and understand and fit into the humanitarian operations environment. And we also had to say, okay, well, the scope is, don't expect, a vessel full of Agility booked containers to come rolling in. We can supply some support, but not all support. So all of that was worked through trust building and dialogue. And I don't think we set out to say we want to build trust. We set out to say, how would something like this even work? And it resulted in trust building. And that was a very good, powerful lesson for us, is engaging and building these relationships. That allowed us to define the scope of the partnership, define who the roles and responsibilities, And that laid a foundation for us to later grow. We originally started out saying we're going to be sudden onset, large scale natural disaster response for 6 to 8 weeks only. And now we've actually progressed the partnership over the subsequent 10 or 12 or 14 years to working and engaging in preparedness and resilient activities and being able to support, even if it's from the sidelines, on complex, drawn out emergencies. So the trust building and relationships and other things, identifying common interests, these are very, very valuable. It's not ethereal. If you do that, you can actually define your scope and manage a good partnership. That's what we found.
If I can come in there just to kind of back up what Frank is saying more than anything else, the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, which is the group of partners that we're kind of part of, started in 2013 as a small group, being effectively driven from Zurich at the centre. So we had individual relationships, and we kind of pigeonholed partners into specific roles to do specific things that we felt was the right thing. And of course, that kind of starting off point meant that the partner conformed. They put forward proposals about what they were going to do that fitted into those pigeonholes. Over the course of the 5 years of that first phase of the work that we were doing, one of the things that we established was this trust. And by building relationships, we spent a lot of time with them. We spent a lot of time in individual dialogue, in multi-party dialogue, just trying to understand each other. And I echo what Frank was saying. We just didn't understand each other. The language we were using is just completely different from what we were experiencing from the different sectors. Where we are currently, we have what I call a distributed leadership model of working within the partnership, in the sense that we have specific activities or specific kind of work streams that are leading towards a common vision for the future. So it's a strategically important vision for us. It's a strategically important vision for all of the partners, and that's why they've signed up for it. And within that, we have work streams that are led by individual partners. They take responsibility for it. They manage the whole relationship. They bring in the other interested parties from around that alliance. And it's not Zurich sitting in the middle of it saying, you'll do this, you'll do that, you'll do the other. It's now very much about saying, we have a 10-party capacity here to be able to deliver the outcome, which we all sign up to. And we've established a kind of an open, trusting relationship that enables us to be able to make the most of that. But it all starts, as Frank has said, it all starts with trust. Without trust, it's almost impossible to have those kind of relationships that enable you to be flexible about this.
Okay, can I come in here on just to support what was being said just before in terms of how important it is just to build a relationship, but also how long it takes. I mean, this is not easy, I think all of us who have worked through that, it's really time consuming. It requires resources, and hence my second point is like we need to be careful about not coming up with a proliferation of platforms of new partnerships, gimmicks, etc. Because then our attention or focus get dissolved into maybe unnecessary initiatives. So that's why I was trying to maybe unsuccessfully convince you, let's use what we've got. So let's not break what functions. Let's try to improve it, because if we want to build something completely new, it will take a lot of time and resources. And maybe just to go back to the point, the question from my colleague Uwe in UNICEF in terms of, okay, what do we do beyond the fundraising and the platform, etc. I think clearly from, UNICEF or I guess UNHCR or WFP or many of the NGO partners out there, we want to be operational. So we want to have partnerships with, especially now with the private sector, that is directly operational. Is to have, for example, pro bono technical expertise. Right now we have 6 experts, 6 staff from Veolia. It's a big French utility who are in Lebanon on secondment to us to repair the sanitation system that was destroyed by the explosion like a month and a half ago. For us, this is operational partnership. These people come in free of charge, expertise in big systems that we don't have in UNICEF, and they do good work. And after 2 months, they go back. And they have provided fantastic, support to Lebanon and its people. So these are the type of partnerships that we are looking at when it comes to humanitarian response.
I think to echo what Luke was just saying there, Andy, the role of the private sector in this, we have to stop thinking of it as just simply being a financial resource. The financial sector, well, the private sector in particular at the moment is increasingly looking at its role in society and what it does to try to help improve the world. And to be a part of what it is. You know, ultimately, if you don't have successful communities around, you don't have a business model. So it's a very, very kind of symbiotic relationship, or could be, with that. But that relies upon us taking a partnership approach that brings more than just finance to the table, brings what people have to offer in terms of guidance, advice, support, expertise, whatever it happens to be, that can help to develop improved systems. The development world is full of things that we keep trying and which there is examples of keeping failing at. And I think we can improve on that by harnessing that power within the different sectors, bringing them together.
And just to add on what David said, so in terms of involving the private sector, and that links to so a comment that was raised before in terms of scaling. So we can use the partnership structures that are there in order to scale so solutions that we develop, but we can also use the partner organizations, so the United Nations, but also the multinational companies, to replicate some partnership initiatives and to scale them among the different locations in which they are operating. So I think coming back to what Luke said, it's maybe not necessary to create new things, but to scale up the structures that we have, and by using the capacities of the partnership partners and the ecosystem that we have around.
Time is flying past, and so I'm going to connect the last two questions together and combine them with the opportunity for you, the panelists, to make your own call to action. So first of all, if you could try to answer these last two questions, and then say, what is your request to people that are online today? How can we make a positive difference going forward? So the first person I'm going to ask to speak is Marsha, and then we'll come to Nishani. So Marsha, over to you.
Thank you. My question, just because time is running very fast, in the first 24 hours of an emergency, with consideration of due diligence, how are INGOs expected to scope up relevant local and national partners, coming away from the private-public sector partnership, but more to a community, local and national partnership base?
Thanks, Marsha. And now Nishani.
Hi, I'm Nishani with ICVA. For me, I think the question is, most of the partnerships that we see in the field, especially with local national actors, are quite unequal. And with the whole risk sharing aspect, many of the national local actors and partners, especially NGOs, take on most of the risk and the burden of risk. So my question to you is, how do you make your partnership, especially with the local actors, meaningful? And how do you sustain them? Over.
Thanks, Nishani. That's a particularly important value for Impact 17. Not only do we promote, support and create partnerships, but we also encourage and insist on that local community engagement as well, because we try to put the ownership of their future back into their hands. So really pleased that somebody from the audience has asked that question. Well, not easy ones. Let's start with Marsha's question first.
So I can make a comment on Marsha's question, and the answer is don't start in the 24 hours before an emergency. I think that's the key here. If you're really genuinely interested in having partnerships, then this kind of reinforces the need to get really ahead of that curve, to recognise that you could have emergencies that are cropping up. Think about what kind of actors you need in play to be able to deal with those, to think about what you can do beforehand, so to make sure it doesn't turn into an emergency if possible. And then if it does turn into an emergency, you've then got a ready-made system to activate. Activating a system that's in place is obviously much, much more simple than looking at it and going, oh my life, here we go again. Here's a disaster. How do I get people on the ground? Who do I partner with, etc. I think it's just far too late to leave it to that point.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, David. In fact, I suspect there's a person on our call named Natasha who's offering a technology solution of some kind. I've been watching her comments on the side here. So my guess is that there's work being done to facilitate quickening of establishing a partnership. So we're never going to have all the resilience we need and all the plan for all the risk we need and all the locations we need. So in the event that we are caught short and partnerships need to be established at the local level following a sudden onset emergency, one, rely on your local NGO partners to inform you who the good players are within that society and can contribute. Engage them using technology if possible. And two, the ground rules should be understood for everyone. If you want to offer services, these are the ground rules and constraints under which you must operate. If you can't follow those ground rules, no worries. You go off into your commercial bit. And if you can, great, you're welcome to join us.
If I can just comment briefly on Marsha's question, yeah, I fully agree. Obviously, it's all about preparedness. So the work needs to start before, and actually many NGOs are doing very strong on preparedness. So that's a given. Maybe just if moving to Nishani's question on risk transfer, because obviously that's a big question on. And actually a big question that NGOs are putting to UN agencies, including UNICEF. How are you transferring risk to us, especially local NGOs? I mean, that's something that we take very seriously. I think the way to go around it is also to ensure that we build capacity of local NGOs as part of our partnership arrangements, so that we transfer knowledge, we transfer money. So to make sure that these local NGOs are properly equipped when they work in high risk or high threat environments. So as you know, this is this big debate right now taking place, and we want to address this seriously. Thank you.
We also to quickly comment on Masha's question about how to do the due diligence in 24 hours. I agree, so that's too late. But I would also like to highlight that there are very good guidelines on how to do the due diligence. On the one hand, first doing your own homework in terms of what do I need, and what are the requirements from my organization vis-a-vis my partners, and then also guidelines on how to screen so third-party organization in terms of are they reliable partners. So it's something that can be done in advance. I would like to highlight that. And so how do we actually make partnerships locally meaningful? So here it's a question also of the shaping the governance and the operational model so that we have representatives. So in the governance committees that are not just there in order to be consulted, but really have a meaningful role to play, and to what extent the operational models are really tailored to the local needs. So a shift from really globally anchored to being more locally anchored.
I think to echo Leah a little here, it's the engagement model that I think will really make it meaningful. And it will also help to share risk. So if you're thinking about the risk from a funder recipient kind of relationship, which is a very traditional kind of approach, the funder almost certainly doesn't accept any risk and ties the deliverer, the recipient, up in so many knots that they have to deliver in a certain way and bear all the risk for whether they do or whether they don't. I think that the moving towards a more impact focus where how you get it delivered is not important, but the outcome at the end of it is the thing that you're aiming for, and actively manage that. So the flexibility approach where you have a meaningful dialogue backwards and forwards about what to do, how to do it, when to do it, why it's changing, how it's changing, all of that kind of process enables you to understand the risk and to be able to plan for and mitigate against that risk. So it helps to distribute that in a more meaningful way. So ultimately, it kind of comes back to that trust, relationship building, dialogue kind of approach that will help to make it meaningful.
Yeah, I would add to that, David, by saying that having transparency in the relationship is important, and everyone have a clear understanding of what the obligations to which they've committed, and their limitations. So people aren't stretching their risk envelope. And the more what we found is the more you engage and build trust, the more appetite organizations tend to have for buying in and supporting each other on these risk things. And then if all else fails, call David and he'll sell you some insurance.
Well, look, before we close up, I'm just going to give you all one last chance to give your call to action, your main message to everybody. Is there something that you need or that you want people to do?
I think from a funder perspective, and I'll use that hat, I'll keep that hat on firmly at the moment. I think that the landscape for funding needs to change. We need to create a stronger role for funders to play beyond the provision of money. And in order to do that, I think that's a kind of an ask for any of the NGOs in the audience or any of the agencies in the audience to start challenging the funder to be more engaged with what you're trying to do, to be recognizing that you need to have a flexible, adaptable approach to managing outcome and pushing towards an outcome oriented kind of view. All the time we remain stuck in a kind of log frame activities delivery kind of mode is all the time when all of the challenges with partnerships will remain, and we need to break that paradigm.
Luke, what's your call to action?
It's the same as David, actually. I mean, it's really, we need to change the paradigm. We need to expand the partnerships, especially to private sector companies, where we see a lot of potential in new areas that we don't have in the UN system. And therefore, we need to bring that technical expertise for humanitarian preparedness and response. We know for sure it's working because we have already some examples, but we need now to scale up. So if there are like some private sectors companies listening, interested in joining forces with us, please call me.
And Frank, and then we'll close with Leah.
I'd say keep pushing and keep innovating. You know, if you're on this call, it's because this is a topic of interest to you and it's a field in which you've been engaging. And it's been very encouraging to watch the comments and seeing people like Natasha saying we're building tech solutions, and Mohammed Al-Mushtari saying that he's building, doing research on NGO business relationships and things of this. Leah's on the call. So the space is moving, and I would encourage everyone to keep moving, keep pushing, and keep innovating, and keep engaging, and encourage other people to do so as well. There's plenty of room at the table, and there's a lot of value from these partnerships on a personal and corporate level, and tangible value. But it's of all the things I do in sustainability, this is the one I get the most questions about. So from top to bottom across the company, it's a good field.
And I would say my call closely relates to what Frank has said. So there is a need for greater coordination among actors in the partnership space, so among different partnerships, but also across the academic and practice divide. So I think we can really benefit from each other by putting together our knowledge. And so here's my invitation to join us on December 9th and 10th, where we will organize clinics where partnership practitioners and academics come together to solve practical challenges arising in partnerships, but we need to know what are the most pressing challenges. So we have a survey prepared, very quick, where you can just highlight what are the challenges that you would like to discuss with us, and Andy will send the survey link after this call. So thank you very much for participating, and this way helping us to bring academics and practitioners together in advancing our knowledge on cross-sector partnerships.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you've some more ideas for action than you did before. One last message: the dialogue is still open. You can join a new initiative called an Open Table, the Open Table sessions, and you can use the link straight away, starting now, the link that you can see on the screen. But before we go, thank you especially to the speakers, Leah, David, Luke and Frank, and to Alliance for Impact and the Sustainable Impact Association and Impact 17 for pulling all this together. But most of all, as always, thank you to all of you for doing what you can within your own organisations and in partnership with each other and with others. We'll share a recording of the discussion with all of you and the short questionnaire that Leah mentioned, and please share them around. As usual, let us know what you thought and how we can keep improving these discussions and what other subjects you'd like to get involved in. And until then, stay well, stay safe, and keep looking to make the world a better place. We'll see you soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Hey, Andy, are you still there?